Hello, we have been talking about the magic show by the Federal Reserve, how to turn this $2 trillion into $6 trillion recently. This topic sounds very complicated to many of you. It's similar that you are touching something with a few layers of a glove. It does feel comfortable and feel very confusing many times. If you feel like that, that was right feeling because the whole system is kind of designed in this way. The Ford, who kind of started the automobile industry in the U.S., once said that it is well enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system. For if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. So let's say there are a lot of this type of tricks and magic in this world of finance. This is only one of that. If you'd like to see how revealing this magic, this few videos, let me know. And for me personally, I like those things that need you to sit down and think it through. And I also need those stories that have full of drama and how those people make money and lose money in this financial world. Now coming back, in just 3 weeks of time, the Federal Reserve has been doing a lot of unprecedented act, from increasing the size of repo repurchase agreement to restarted the quantitative easing, from providing liquidity the lending facility to the U.S. corporate debt and municipal debt, to providing the lending liquidity lending facility to international central bank, from lowering the interest rate to 0% to provide direct lending to U.S. companies. The chief economist of J.P. Morgan, Michael Valori, said the U.S. Federal Reserve is turning from the last resort for the financial institution to the last resort as a commercial bank to the whole economy. And the Federal Reserve chairman, John Paul, is more like a blindfolded magician go into a uncharted territory and leaving the market scared sometimes. As we know that because the Federal Reserve's very special position in the market, whatever the Federal Reserve chairman or chairwoman say is going to be overinterpreted by the market. For example, Alan Greenspan, he invented a way to say a lot but also say nothing. And he openly said that if you feel you know what I'm saying, you probably misunderstood me. And the Wall Street started even to pay attention to his briefcase and using the weight of the briefcase to indicate whether or not the Federal Reserve is going to lower the interest rate or keeping that untouched. For the 19 years of Alan Greenspan's tenure, he was only interviewed once. It was in October of 1987. He was interviewed by ABC This Week with David Brickley. And right after that, the market experienced a Black Monday. And after that, he was never interviewed by TV when he was in the position. After 2008 financial crisis, because of all of this controversy, Federal Reserve providing this quantitative easing and financial liquidities, Ben Bernanke started the press conference after each of the FOMC meeting, but he was still reluctant to be interviewed on the TV. And the only one exception is in March of 2009, after the market has tanked to the bottom, starting to bottom up, he was interviewed by CBS 60 Minutes. And myself, I see one of the high-rank Federal Reserve personnel is presenting at one of the academia conference. Literally, that person is reading out a canned script, because anything that is not script could potentially be overinterpreted. For example, in October 2018, the new Federal Reserve Chairman John Paul, he said something unscripted in the Atlantic Festival. He said, "We may go past neutral, but we are a long way from neutral at this point, probably." And right after that, it triggered the big market crash in 2018. And after that, the Federal Reserve has to go out to put out the fire. On November 28, 2018, Federal Reserve Chairman John Paul has to say something different. He used only 2 words, just below the neutral level, and make the market surge again. And John Paul himself was only interviewed once. It was on March 2019, when there are a lot of controversy whether or not he is going to be fired by the president. He was interviewed by CBS 60 Minutes, trying to defend himself not being fired. So magicians are not very talkative. They do not say too much. Every single word or sentence said by magician is useful, even though those words sound meaningless. Some of the meaning or the things between the lines can only be interpreted or understood by people who are also magicians. So once you understand that, now you see, last Thursday, March 26, John Paul was interviewed by NBC's Today Show. It was very, very rare. The host of the show got pretty excited and tweeted that this is the first time Federal Reserve Chairman was interviewed for the show's 60 years history, 67 years of history. And during the interview, John Paul said the U.S. economy is probably already in a recession, and the unemployment rate will be very high. But that's not his purpose to be interviewed. His purpose is to emphasize that the Federal Reserve has enough ammunition and tools to handle the situation. And of course, the first thing come to mind is that $454 billion lending facility comes from this CARES Act. John Paul said effectively, $1 of loss absorption of backstop from Treasury is enough to support $10 worth of loans. When it comes to this lending, we are not going to run out of ammunition. So it's very clear that the leverage is going to be 1 to 10, and therefore that $454 billion is going to turn into $4 trillion. So together with this lending facility and this unlimited time, unlimited amount of quantitative easing, is going to make the Federal Reserve balance sheet swell very high. So in just a few weeks of time, the Federal Reserve balance sheet has already approaching that $6 trillion line. And as reported by Bloomberg, that number can go to about $9 to $10 trillion. I know many people are concerned that whether or not this type of unprecedented action by the Federal Reserve is going to trigger super inflation. And given that the Federal Reserve one of the target is 2% inflation rate, this sounds like contradicting that. However, this question is not that easy, as the Federal Reserve is providing money is the same as printing money. And this current situation is we are facing both the risk of inflation and deflation, but that's another long story. Let's come back to this 1 to 10 leverage. In the past few years, because of this very low interest rate environment, a lot of the corporates, they are not making profits as zombie firms. But because of the low interest rate, they can still borrow at super low interest rate and providing dividend payments and buying back their own stock, and they're living a pretty happy life. Just one more words on that. Because of the interest rate low, sometimes it's lower than their dividend yield. So borrow at a lower interest rate and use that to buy back their stocks without paying that higher dividend payment is more like a arbitrage, right? And adding on to that, there's also tax benefit of borrowing money. And of course, this arbitrage will not be bypassed by most of the companies. It may be okay if 1 or 2 companies are doing that, but if almost all of the companies are doing that, this almost no risk arbitrage is turned into a huge risk. Especially there's also leveraged loan and also the derivative of the leveraged loan, which is CLO, the collateralized loan obligation, is making this problem much more magnified. In academia and also on Wall Street, there has been a louder consensus in this past 2 years that this type of leveraged loan and the CLO is going to be problematic. But people are also trying to calm themselves down by saying if the interest rates drop to 0, then it should be fine. However, no one can predict that there is this coronavirus and essentially frozen the whole economy. 10 millions of people already lost their job, and there are probably more on the road. So currently, Federal Reserve is still emphasizing on those investment-grade corporate bonds. Those are pretty good bonds. But we all know that company like GE, even though they are still nominally investment-grade, but they are probably already should be graded a notch lower, meaning that they probably should be a falling angel. Therefore, as Bloomberg said, Federal Reserve may have to provide some financial aid to those junk bonds. And since we're talking about a junk bond, those are the bonds with a low capability of paying back, or another way to say is they have a pretty high risk of not paying back. And that is due when the economy is doing good and the unemployment rate is low. And now, when the economy is frozen, if Federal Reserve do not provide those type of lending facility, those zombie firms probably will have to die out. So this money provided by the Department of Treasury and then also the Federal Reserve is not used for stimulus. It's not stimulating the economy. It's used to prevent a credit crunch. So this is not a helicopter money. This is helicopter credit. So now the problem is, if the Federal Reserve go out to buy those risky junk bonds, what about the loss? What if the Federal Reserve lose money on that? Federal Reserve can only legally buy government-backed securities under the Dodd-Frank Act. When the Department of Treasury signed off, the Federal Reserve can go directly buy those corporate and municipal bond, but there's possibility of losing money on that. So there need a firewall. And that firewall is this magic, right? This magic was implemented in this way. The Department of Treasury is going to create some special purpose vehicle, which is SPV. Those special purpose vehicle will serve as those firewall. Those SPV was used by company like Aaron, used by company like Alibaba. They're using that to provide a firewall between different things. So now this Congress provided $454 billion is serving as this backdrop. As John Paul said, those are serving to absorb the potential loss and backstop for this. Bloomberg said, quote by quote, Congress is providing money to absorb any losses the central bank may incur on its emergency loans, some of which will be going to riskier borrowers. So now we know many of the losses from the zombie firm will probably be taken over by all of us. At the end, we have to say that a lot of magics, the secret of the magic shouldn't be revealed. It's kind of like the movie, The Prestige. The magic of managing the bird takes a life for each one of the show. That's all for today. I'll see you for next time.